We're continuing our live coverage this hour of the ongoing tensions at UCLA, where police in riot gear clashed with protesters for the second night in a row. Just the latest attempt to break up the pro-Palestinian encampment there. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is on the ground. He has been there for hours. Steve, you were there through the night as the protests escalated. It was chaotic, a litany of flashbang grenades when we were speaking with you earlier. Now it's morning, seems to be much quieter. What are you seeing as the sun comes up?
Here when it started, here now that it's over. The sun has risen and really set on this protest. This encampment has been cleared out, save for all of this material that has been left over, the amount of garbage, frankly, that is, from the wreckage from police coming in hot and heavy overnight. This is essentially over. All the protesters have been cleared out. Police have made dozens of arrests. In fact, we heard last count was 132. It's at least over 100. Our crew spotting dozens just being in and around campus. I can show you around. I just keep walking through here. I think I told you earlier, Joe, I didn't know how deep this went. It is still surprising and shocking to see it now, now that there's nobody in it. And it's amazing how much stuff there is in here built up over about a week or so. But overnight, police came in and their objective was to really reduce the amount of build up defenses that protesters deliberately wanted to have to prevent police from coming in, so police could come in and clear this completely out. And that's exactly what happened. This all started somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning local time here. Police starting to sort of posture like they were going to do something instead of looking like a security force. Instead of standing out this way, they started looking in this way. You started seeing zip ties. You started seeing helmets. You started hearing people on loudspeakers telling protesters that it's time to leave. And then police, all in one force, started to push back with a line. And in that line, they deployed what we assume is irritant and tear gas, not tear gas, but some sort of irritant in the air to let people know that it was time to leave. They started certainly deploying flashbangs. My goodness, it was hot and heavy the entire time we've been on air. I can still hear them in my head. And then they use non-lethal weaponry to sort of get people to push back. They cut through this area almost like a hot knife through butter, chewing up plywood and the metals that sort of kept protesters feeling like they could defend this until it got down to the final line of protesters in a sort of a standoff that things were dwindling out, police plucking people out one by one, forcefully using zip ties to detain them and doing it safely. In fact, I spoke to somebody with the California Highway Patrol. That was the primary force, the guys that were in that tactical gear that you saw throughout the night. It was primarily them. He said that their primary objective and the reason why it took as long as it did, and he means, as far as when this was declared unlawful, the plan was set in motion that they would come in here and do something about it. The reason why they waited so long is to have a big enough force to do it safely. And in his words, was to do it to protect the protesters. That was one of the primary objectives, no doubt about it. And it appears like, according to him, no major injuries, that they did it safely and they did it efficiently.
Yeah, in fact, police telling our local affiliate NBC there this morning they believe this operation was a success. You mentioned you saw the zip ties used to take some people into custody. Others left the encampment. They weren't arrested. About 132 people arrested at this point. Steve, one thing we don't know yet, and these numbers will remain fluid, how many are students versus how many were not students who attended the university, right?
It's one of the biggest questions we've had since we've been here, is who exactly was a student, who, we know there were some faculty as well, faculty and staff. How many of them were here? How many people were sort of outside interested parties that, UCLA is a gathering point for, the intellectual world wanting to make a stand? And how many of these people were outside agitators that we typically have seen in these modern protests, that are literally here to cause trouble, that want to do the work of making other people feel miserable because they are here to cause problems. We don't know. We've never known since we've been on the ground, even before these actions were taken. There was never really an official count from the university of even how many people were just in here generally. We think estimated somewhere around 300 or so, maybe 300 to 500. But then does that count the people who were ancillary and also protesting on campus? Because there are still, despite the fact that everything is gone here, you might be able to still hear a loudspeaker. There's still police here because there is still a demonstration happening on the UCLA steps over there. So, does that number include them? I think all of this matters because, as we know, state officials want to do an investigation specifically on what happened that night between counter-protesters and protesters. So I think all of that is important to know, but we simply don't have those answers yet. Joe.
Steve, and it's worth noting there are still a few weeks left of school there at UCLA. Do we have any idea of what is next for this campus moving forward?
We know that because of the impact of this essentially what was a raid, that classes will be impacted over the next few days. They want people to learn from home for a minute. We know staff has been working from home. We know, obviously, looking at the library, looking at Royce Hall, famous Royce Hall, there is I don't know if you can see it. There's graffiti all over this. There are signs, just the physical marring of the university, I think, needs time to come back and recover. There's so much of this, not only just here, but all over campus because of what just happened. And then there's the sort of the moving on theoretically about where do you go from here as a university. This is a university system that doesn't like a heavy hand. They like people to be able to protest and demonstrate. And they took a lot of heat for the fact that there wasn't more police intervention when there were counter-protesters. So I think it's a university that is sort of wounded in its idea of itself. And I don't know what happens next. I know there will be a lot of conversations, not only between the student body and the staff and the faculty and the administrators, but also between the administrators and the state for what happened that night that led to people getting hurt. Joe.
Steve, we have just 20 seconds left here, but is there a moment or just one image that stands out most to you?
It is the moment in which the barriers come down, and I was with you when it happened, that whole thing collapsing onto itself, because you have to remember of how long in my head I've seen that stand. To see it just ripped apart all in one motion, it was incredible.
All right. Steve Patterson, we appreciate your reporting there on the campus of UCLA through the night and into this morning. Thanks again.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.